Story 1. I suffer from a fairly well-known but understudied affliction known as Meniere's disease. It's an inner ear disorder that affects the middle ear, specifically the hearing and balance functions. Symptoms include tinnitus, a feeling of fullness in the afflicted ear, permanent hearing loss, and debilitating vertigo attacks. I was diagnosed with it in 2000 at the age of 18 after suffering 2 years of horrible vertigo attacks. It was a pain to find a diagnosis, but once we did, my mom got us hooked up with a specialist that was able to somewhat treat it. Since that time, I have continued to have the tinnitus and fullness, but the vertigo attacks have all but vanished. In fact, by the time this story happened in 2015, I hadn't experienced any sort of vertigo in over a decade. Enough of that, though. As the story goes, I was working late into the wee hours of the morning when I decided to take a break to catch a smoke and take my dog out. Once we got outside and downstairs to the small grassy area next to my apartment building, I let my dog off the leash and popped a squat on the stairs and watched as she did her doggy stuff. By the time my cigarette was halfway finished, she had already taken a long leak and was now starting to make big sweeping circles, looking for a place to park her poop. Knowing it would probably be a couple more minutes until she found her ideal spot, I just kept on smoking while I counted her laps. It was 10 at that point. As she does with her weird little poop ritual, she'll make one big final circle outside of the area she has been stomping around in before zeroing in. As I watched her start to make her final sweep, she stopped dead in her tracks about 20 feet in front of one of the trees that spot the landscape in front of my apartment complex. I was about another 30 or so feet behind her location, but I could see from where I was sitting that her hackles had come out and her body was completely rigid. Knowing my dog like I did, she was about 20 seconds away from losing her shit and waking up half the neighborhood with her angry bark. I put my smoke out and started walking her way and softly calling her name. Usually this is enough to break her focus and get her to calm down. But that night, she was onto something. As I started getting closer to her, I noticed a change in my ever-present tinnitus. It had changed in pitch and become a lot louder. Louder than I remember it being in a long time. Another few steps and I start to feel a weird sensation behind my left eyeball. It was not an unfamiliar feeling, but like the level of the tinnitus, I had not felt it for some time. I took another few steps where I come up on my dog and gently pet her back. As I did that, a piercing pain shot through the left side of my head. Once again, it was not an unfamiliar feeling, but it was not something I had experienced in some time, nor did I want to. It was the telltale sign that within the next 90 seconds, I was going to start my first vertigo attack in nearly 11 years. I started to talk to my dog in a more stern tone to try and break whatever trance she was in, but she ignored me and continued to focus on the tree in front of us. Only now she was letting out a deep guttural growl, unlike anything I had ever heard from her before or since. Like clockwork, the pain behind my left eye and left side of my head abruptly ended, and I was hit with a wave of heavy vertigo. I hooked on my dog's leash and stood up. When I did, the vertigo gave off the sensation that my brain had detached from the base of my spine and was doing free-form backflips in my skull. I had to fight to stay upright and keep my eyes from rolling back so I had enough perceived balance to make it back upstairs. To do this, I focused on the tree that my dog had been so upset about. And that's when it decided to step out from behind the tree and into our view. What it was remains to be seen, but I can tell you that it was tall, taller than me, and I stand at 6'7". It was skinny too, like unimaginably skinny. So skinny, in fact, that you wouldn't believe organs could fit inside its torso. Along with its odd stature, the thing's skin was this deep pitch black. Due to the color and the weird way it played with the poor lighting, it was impossible to make out any discernible facial or body features. From that impression alone, the only description I can muster up is that it looked like a poorly drawn 2D stickman that busted off the page. My dog was dead silent at this point, but she was shaking. We didn't dare move though, so I just stared at this thing as it looked back at us from maybe 6 feet in front of us. A few seconds more, and then the thing turned around and took off down the street away from us, running at an astounding speed. It moved oddly though, like it was gliding rather than running, almost what a cross-country skier might look like. But even smoother and completely silent, It covered half a block in a matter of seconds before jumping over a 6-foot fence in a single leap and vanishing into the night. A second after it vanished, my vertigo stopped, the tinnitus went down, and I was fine again. Well, mostly fine. I ended up doubling over and puking before walking my dog back. I don't know if my sudden vertigo attack was related to what I saw that night, but it certainly feels that way. Vertigo attacks that are associated with Meniere's tend to last an hour at their shortest and 24 hours at their longest. My attacks always averaged in the 12-16-hour range. This attack lasted less than 2 minutes. Story 2. For some background, I live in the California foothills. My parents and I moved into this house from the city in late 2017, after it had been sitting empty for over a year. The day we moved in, my mother and I arrived first to clean while my father and brother drove the moving truck. Right off the bat, I was uneasy, but tried to write it off. The property felt heavy, is the only way I can describe it. Some people on here describe the feeling of being watched inside their homes. But I had that feeling anytime I stepped outside. We were going to sweep and mop the floors, dust the baseboards and windowsills, when I started noticing this white granular powder all along the baseboards, and the windowsills, and the doorways. I immediately told my mother, who told me not to worry about it and sweep it up. By the time I had swept up every room and cleaned off the windowsills, I was certain it was salt. And a lot of it. But fine, whatever. The people that lived here before were superstitious. Okay, I can live with that. We unpacked the truck over the next week. I was setting up my room when the next bizarre event started happening. Knocking on the windows. Always quick raps that sounded like someone knocking with their knuckles. It would happen so often on all the windows in the house, but when you would turn, no one would be there. You'd go outside, no one would be around the house. This only escalated. My brother and I would walk the dogs around the property. They were older, small dogs who were always good-natured and calm, except for when they were outside at this new house. They would growl, puff out, and get extremely agitated. They hated being outside. Then we started finding the animal carcasses. They were always small creatures, rats, toads, bats. The biggest we ever found was a raccoon. The animals had been gutted, a single deliberate line down their torso, starting at their chest and ending near their rear. No internal organs left. They looked practically mummified, like something had sucked the fluid and blood and organs right out of them. It was one of the most bizarre and brutal things I had ever seen. My brother would stay up late in his room on his computer every night. He liked to game with his friends until the early morning hours. He does not spook easy, but on more than one occasion I would wake up to him shaking me awake, terrified, saying something massive on 2 legs was walking around outside his bedroom window, which he would have open at night. He said it would walk right up to his bedroom window and stop, and when he would look toward the sound, he could hear it scrambling away. I never saw it with my own eyes, and neither did he, but the motion lights outside would be activated every single time, leading to the woods near the back of our property. I know what you're probably thinking. All of this up to this point can be explained away rationally. A crazy person living in the woods, some neighbor messing with us for whatever reason. Well, that was what I told myself too, so I could sleep a little easier at night. Then the banging started. It was so loud and it would sound like it was coming from everywhere at once. The walls would literally vibrate, picture frames rattling right off the walls. It was like something massive, stronger than any crazy person, was pounding on the exterior walls of the house, always late at night, and always in more places than just one. I could never pinpoint the source directly. My brother and I would stumble out of our bedrooms petrified, and my mom would lead us to her room where we would stay after that. My dad would walk the perimeter of our property with his gun, but never found anything. No footprints, no people, nothing. This happened for probably 6 months, and every time a major event would happen, my dad would walk the perimeters with his rifle and come back with nothing. We felt like we were going insane. Then suddenly it just stopped. The mutilated animals stopped appearing. I stopped feeling like I was being watched anytime I would go outside. My dogs stopped being so on edge anytime I took them out, and the property itself seemed to get lighter, like it finally took a deep breath after holding it for so long. I genuinely have no explanation, or even a clue as to what that creature, being entity even was. I'm just glad it seems to have moved on.
Thanks for watching. Don't leave before leaving a like to this video, also hit the subscribe button to support my work. And as always, have a horrific nightmare, my dear.